Yeah, we can see you.
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. So, hello and welcome to Pittsburgh Java User Group. Today we are going to discuss about demystifying open source. The main inspiration of this talk came up when I have been in the software industry for a while, but it was very difficult for me to make my first contribution to open source. And once I did my first contribution, I thought there are a lot of things that I should make others aware who are just looking out to contribute to open source and they have doubts and they don't probably know where to start. So that's just the idea of the talk I had in mind. And by the way, this picture is from Copenhagen, where I lived for 4 years. And this is the Opera House of Copenhagen. So yeah. So, oh, I should actually play here. So believe you can, and you're halfway there. This is one apt quote, which I thought is most applicable here. If you believe you can contribute to open source, then you are almost there. So there are all the resources available, and we'll discuss those in the few slides, next coming slides. Okay, now a few things about me. I'm a JUG leader at Garden State Java User Group and New York Java SIG. I'm a senior software developer at BNY Mellon here in New York. I have more than 12 years of experience in the software industry. And here's my Twitter handle. I do write some blogs. So this is my Medium link. And you can also check out my GitHub page as well. So here it is. Let's continue. Okay, so what agenda do we have here? We'll talk about what is an open source project, how different it is from other softwares, what are the main differences to main things to identify from other softwares. As a developer, why you should care about open source software is also an interesting fact. We'll also have a checkpoint before you start to make contributions, and we'll discuss the detailed anatomy of open source software. We'll also look at the files to look for when you are just starting to make your first contributions. We'll discuss those in details as well. And then we'll look at a few more things. What are the tools used by open source to help contribute? There are ways on which how you can contribute, and we'll take a look at examples as well from GitHub. And at the end, I'll try to explain some tips where how you can find out a project to contribute, and within the project how you can select an issue where you want to make your contributions, and the different areas to contribute. So it's not just writing a code, it can be different things as well. So we'll discuss those in the upcoming slides. So what's an open source software? Let's see what it is. So an open source software is a software with source code that anyone can modify, inspect, and enhance. So the users have the ability to distribute many copies of the original program as they want. There is no restriction. Anyone can use the program for any purposes. Most of the software industry is highly dependent on open source softwares. There are no licensing fees or restrictions. Then if you don't know, a Linux operating system is also an open source software, which is very commonly used. And this is like a great example of that. Now let's see how different is open source from other softwares. So we'll look at the comparison of what an open source software means and what are the closed source software. So open source softwares are like Apple, WordPress, and Android. Closed source software, as an example, McAfee, Skype, Apple, Acrobat, Adobe. So these are some few examples of differences you'll see. And the main difference comes in the other source softwares. Other softwares are also known as the proprietary software or closed source software. Only the original authors can legally copy and inspect. So you have a lot of restrictions on modifying the code. You cannot, first of all, it's licensed. It's a paid license, so you don't really have easy access or free access to it. There are licenses on the open source software as well, we'll discuss, but the closed source software are very restrictive. In order to use them, you have to agree to certain license agreements, and then you will not be able to do everything that you want to do. So it depends a lot on the author of the software. So you have to make sure that you understand that very well before trying to use those software. Whereas in open source, licenses affect the way people can use, study, modify, distribute software. In general, the open source licenses allow users to use the open source for software for any purposes they wish. So there are no restrictions here. Some open source licenses, what some people call copyleft license, stipulate that anyone who releases a modified version can also release the source code for that program alongside with it. So it's very easy and straightforward for open source license and the softwares related to them to be used. Also, the open source licenses stipulate that anyone who alters and shares the program with others must also share the program source code without charging a licensing fee. So the gist is like, you don't have a licensing fee attached here in terms of open source software. So by design, open source licenses promote collaboration, they allow sharing, they allow other users to make modifications and incorporate these changes to their own software. So anyone can make the change, and they can, if they satisfy the criteria, if their software they add value to is tested well, they can incorporate those changes into their own projects. So that's also a good point for open source. So now I created this myth or truth question. So hopefully, I know some of you have already attended this talk before, so I'll try to ask you not to answer this, allow other people to know to answer. If you can tell me if open source software is less secure than proprietary software or not. Any takers for this? I'll give 5 seconds. Okay.
We have an answer in the chat.
I actually can't read chat
okay,
somehow.
I can read them.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I see the
you.
chat popping up, but I can't read it.
We have Philip and Rodrigo saying myth, and Desh saying that it depends on the software.
If it's an open source software, and if it's a good maintained open source software, it's actually more secure. So because of a lot of involvement in the community, and there's a lot of people involved, there's a lot of processes there. So it's more secure. You can actually audit an open source software. So that's why it is more secure than a proprietary software. So whenever I talk about open source software, I'm assuming they are highly maintained softwares. So yeah, there are ways to check that as well. We can see that later. So open source software development also allows anyone to fix broken code, while closed source can only be fixed by the vendor. So this one difference, it's actually very important, because a lot of times let's say you are using a closed source software and you found a bug, you cannot fix the bug because the fix has to be done by the vendor itself. So you have to like push them to do it, but there's no deadline. It causes a lot of troubles. Whereas if you are doing an open source development, if you find a bug in your open source software, you just fix it and just submit your code itself. So that changes a lot of things. It's faster cycle and it's easier. And as I mentioned earlier, it can be audited, it can be fixed when the behavior or the security is in doubt. So there's always a lot of big checks for open source software in the world. Okay, the next one is open source software is maintainable. Again, I'm saying a good one. I have 5 seconds for you guys. Rinat, can you read out to me?
Yeah, we have an answer from Philip saying truth.
That's right. It's a lot maintainable because there's a lot of industry collaboration with it. A lot of folks are maintaining it, so it's a lot of responsibility. So yeah, there's a sense of responsibility, motivation to improve the software, make the code better, and not just for monetary gain. And you'll be surprised that there is a lot of passion involved in making that code well prepared and maintained. Uh, and open source software generally tracks all the upgrades, improvements, maintenance measures, and they use paid tools actually to help maintain a record of versioning. And there are a lot of backend things that happens in order to maintain it. So not just by the person who's contributing the code, but by the maintenance of the project, they are also be wary of what are the changes taking place. You also have release notes, you also have upgrades going on. So the community has already got the maintenance concern issues covered before it even gets started. They are very active in the community. Okay, third one. Open source is not an enterprise grade product. I'll give you 5 seconds.
We got a couple of myths in the chat.
Oh, nice. So yes, it is an enterprise grade product because it's like we already talked before. It's well maintained. It is audited. There is a lot of infrastructure work done. We use paid tools to actually keep the project up and running. So yes, it's an enterprise grade product. I work for Microprofile as a contributor and also as marketing uh, calls to it. So we have weekly calls where we actually maintain and discuss about what's happening in the project. So it's so well planned that you know that this call is going to happen, and you have just like your daily workplace calls. Nothing is changed, and it's such a nice thing that everyone is passionate about that. So it's really good. Okay, many of the world's biggest organizations just don't use open source, but they are in some cases like Google, Android base an enormous portion of their entire business on it. So Google has a very good open source software group. So they are heavily involved, and they try to make sure that their softwares are well maintained and it's good for contribution as well. Okay, now interesting part, why should I care about open source and open source software basically? So there are two perspectives here. As an employer, if you are a hiring manager or if you are in a leadership position, the reason why you should be aware of this is because open source software development enables companies to innovate faster. The entire industry is dependent on open source software. They are free of cost, they don't require any licenses, and it's well-maintained product. So a lot of softwares are dependent. Then it creates a large, effective ecosystems of users that improve the quality. So like a lot of people are already contributing, they are making sure that the quality of the product is well maintained. So it makes sense to be involved as well. And then in the open source community, when a bug is found, users contribute to fix it. It's always a very active community based on what projects are you working on. Using open source software brings in vulnerabilities, and it can be avoided by contributing to the library directly itself. So this example is just like I told a few slides back. If you are working on an open source software and you find a bug, you can actually contribute and fix the bug to the library directly itself. So a contributing cycle is the software cycle is like shortened, and you are working on it on your contributions, and your software is getting better and better. So that's one thing. So we talked about as in terms of a hiring manager, as a developer or as a contributor, there are also another ways, the another advantages to actually do that. First of all, you'll improve your existing skills. If someone needs to brush up on their Java skills or Python skills, then that's also a good idea. It's a real world example, so you can always contribute and make sure your skills are all up to date. You can also learn new technical skills, by the way. If you're not a Java developer, you are a Python developer, you can learn Java by contributing to a Java project or vice versa. It's all about committing to the project and just making sure that whatever you are delivering is well tested. That's what it all matters. And you can build a feature that you need. So sometimes there are APIs that you may want in a library. You can request for those APIs and also like contribute directly itself. You'll also meet people who are very interested in very similar things, like similar interest developers are there. You can learn from them. You can find mentors via contributing to open source. I found my mentors via open source, and they really helped me. And you can also teach others. If you are already well versed in open source contributions, you can teach others about more things in open source. You also learn skills like pair programming. I also did pair programming when I was making my first contribution. I had initial questions and ideas, and whatever I wanted to ask, I was able to pair program with the developers to actually learn and get better. You also grow in reputation. Your work is out there on GitHub. So anyone who's hiring you or anyone who's looking at your page on your GitHub, your contributions are visible. That actually, you get a lot of brownie points for that. You also learn people skills. We as developers, we are not very well versed with the people skills. Like communication is the key. So by contributing to open source, just imagine everyone is in a different time zone. They are in a different area altogether, and all of them, they are communicating. The entire open source software is running on the basis of right communication. So you also learn those communication by contributing. So that's a very good skill. Make changes to software used by many people around the world. So it's a nice feeling, I thought. Whatever you are creating, whatever APIs you are creating are being used by many people, and it's a nice skill to have. Okay, so one checkpoint before you want to start contributing, and I wanted to mention this because I faced this at my firm as well. You want to check with your employer before contributing if you are allowed to or you're not, or you need special permissions or anything. So that may be a definite checkpoint. So before you just start coding things in other people's library, just make sure that you check with your employer or someone from legal or HR maybe. So that's a definite checkpoint. Okay, time for myth or truth. Open source software is not scalable. And I want to see what people say about this. I'll give you 5 seconds. I want to make sure people are not sleeping.
We have a few myths, and we have one of it depends in the chat.
Okay. Okay, so open source software is scalable, and we'll see why. So it is never designed to fit everyone's shoe. The entire agenda is to make sure people can make it fit in their shoes. So it doesn't work like your office software the way you are doing it. It's actually more abstract. An open source software is more making sure that other people can make sure that they can utilize it well. So it kind of works the other way around. So just imagine you're making a software that many people are using. So not everyone's requirement is never ever going to be same. So it's always scalable. You have to make it scalable. Otherwise, it will not work for a very long time. That's one thing. Okay, so now we'll see what is the anatomy of an open source software. Uh, just a few things to remember before, if you are not familiar. So there's an author. Author is a person or an organization that creates the project. There's an owner who has the administrative ownership over the organization. So, or the repository ownership. They may be different people or than the original author. They may not be the same. Then there are maintainers, contributors who are responsible for driving the vision and managing the organizational aspects of the project. They may be also authors or owners as well. So they are a wider group of people than author or owner. Then we have contributors, everyone who makes any contribution, that they are called contributors. Then there are community members. There are also the community members are people who uses the project. They might be active in conversations and express their opinions on the project's direction. So you don't have to be the developer who writes code for the open source software. You may be one of the people who are, highlighting the direction of the project or making those conversations and driving the discussions as well. So that's also another idea of contribution. Okay, so what are the important files to look for in an open source software? Let's look at that. So first and foremost, even though it's an open source project, there are licenses to look for. So by definition, every open source project must have an open source license. The good indication is that it shouldn't ask for a fee. That's how you know that it's an open source license. If a project does not have a license, it is not an open source project. There's always a README. So one of the important things to remember, a good open source project, and when I say good, that means a well-maintained open source project is something where you have a README guide. It's an instruction manual that welcomes new people to the community, to the project, and it explains in general why the project is useful, and how to set your project locally and how to get started. All the details which you need should be in this file. So that's another thing to get started. I've seen there is also a contributing file. So whereas READMEs help people use the project, contributing docs help people contribute to the project. It may be the same as README or it may be different as well. So sometimes when there's a lot of information in contribution, how to make contributions, there are certain steps involved. I've seen projects having a different file than the README. So README can just be about more technical details, and contributing is more focused on new developers who are contributing to it. It explains what type of contributions are needed and how the process works. So while not every project has it, its presence will signal you that it's very welcoming project and they want to have more and more contributions too. So that's a sign of an indication where you want to, if you look at that project and you see a contributing guide, that means people want you to contribute here in the project. So that's one thing. And then there's a code of conduct. So the code of conduct sets ground rules for participants' behavior associated and help facilitate a friendly, welcoming environment. While not every project has this file, its presence signals that it's a welcoming project to contribute to. So it's a general guideline. Be nice to everyone when you're contributing. Have like a sort of no arrogance behavior. Be nice to everyone when you are conversing in your tone should be nice enough so that people who are reviewing your code or when you are writing something, they also get the impression that you are more interested in helping the project and not, doing bad things on the internet. So what are the tools used by open source software to help contributions? So now let's look at the tools. So there are issue trackers where people can discuss issues related to the project. There are pull requests where people can discuss and review the changes that are in progress. So pull requests are already the changes which are ready and about to be merged into the project. Those are pull requests. There are also discussion forums or mailing lists. I also recommend checking out the mailing list for a lot of projects, because that gives you a general tone of the project, how the people are talking, what things they are talking about. So some people use these channels more often. How do I do? What do you think about? Uh, Not just writing the bug reports or feature requests. So other use of the issue tracker for all conversation purposes can be discussion forums or mailing lists. And people give feedback as well on mailing lists. It may be a good feedback or a complaint as well, but it's always nice to have a good feedback. So that's always there. Then there's a synchronous chat channel. Not all the projects have a chat channel, but I've seen many projects. So Spring has a very good Gitter or Jitter channel for casual conversations. You can ask questions as well if you have any issues. I've seen it, it's very active, and it works very much like Slack. Slack channels are also there for many projects. So whenever you want to get involved, you can also, watch the conversations here, or maybe start your conversation, get yourself involved, introduce yourself and say, okay, you are interested in contributing. These are the ways to get your contribution started. Get involving in the community is the best way. Okay, so I have another myth or truth question. Contributing to open source software requires a lot of experience. And I'm really curious to this one. And I'll give you guys 5 seconds. I see a lot of chats.
All right, so we have majority myths, but we do have some truths, and that it can at least feel that way.
Yeah, it's a controversial statement, but I would still want to say that it's a myth. Only because it depends on your area of contribution. So it doesn't matter that you are a fresher or a senior developer. A fresher or a junior developer can always contribute to something which is relevant to them. And obviously their work is checked. You can get your work checked by the other developers from the team or your friends, or you can always discuss in the discussion forums and mailing lists. So that's why I don't want to call this as, you need a lot of experience. And I also initially thought that it requires a lot of experience. Maybe that's why I waited for almost 10 years to make my first contribution. But eventually I feel as a senior developer, you can overview many things, from a perspective of a project direction, or also a code perspective. But it's always a good idea to have that motivation in your fresher years, because when you are young and you're trying to contribute, you learn by doing things. And also open source softwares are like a life-size projects. You can learn from it rather than just reading through the books. And that's why I think it's very important to contribute in early years as well as a software developer.
Yep.
So it is the best way to really level up your skills at any stage of your career, even if you are any mid-sized developer or senior developer. As a beginner, you can really learn to level up your skills here. and an experienced developer, you can always brush up your skills and make the software much better quality. I think that's one of the important takeaways here. Okay, so now we want to discuss how we want to contribute, how we can contribute to open source. Uh, let's see. The steps are very simple. You create a GitHub profile, you find a project to contribute to, then you find an issue on the project to work on. There are labels to look for. A lot of projects have, so if you go to the issues tab of the projects, there are labels already made. Sometimes it's first time developers and something like good first issue. So and I find this very interesting because the maintainers of the project create these labels and they want the contributions from the community. And if you find such labels in the projects, you should actually just go ahead and contribute, because it's such a good way that they want you to help, and you also get something out of it. So it's a two-way street here. So I think that's one of the ways to look for. Then you can create an issue on the project if you want, or log it in the issues tab of the project. That's another way. Look for the contributing guidelines for the project. Like I said, there's sometimes a README file or a contributing file, which is always telling you where to look for, how to start. Join the mailing list or follow the project. If you like the project, please start the project. They really appreciate anything you are doing for them. One of the things that I really liked about open source projects are like they are very appreciative of anything you contribute to. So it's nothing like, even if a small line change you are making, everyone in the community, from anyone who's part of the project or not part of the project, they are very appreciative of any work you are putting in, because you're spending time on that project, which matters a lot. And then remember to sign the contributor license agreement. Like if you follow the Eclipse Foundation, if you contribute to projects like Eclipse Collection, there's a license there. You have to sign that license before you contribute. So one of the things that, and these details, you'll find it in the document, in the README document or the contributing guidelines as well. So that should be there. So once you spot the area to work upon, you have to inform the project committers that you are interested in working on it. And you can do this by just creating an issue or comment on the issue that you want to work upon. Like, once you are done, you can fork the project onto your GitHub profile. Once you have forked the project, you can clone the project on your machine. I've seen a new feature on GitHub now. So even when you have forked the project and you haven't, and your parent project has made some updates, you can actually sync it right there on the GitHub page, which is, I thought, was the coolest feature, and they needed it very much from the beginning itself. But yeah, you can clone the project once you have forked it, and then you can make appropriate changes to the project. And make sure you build the project. You have to squish all your commits to one. The reason of squishing all your commits to one is like maintaining a well-versed history. Just try to remember the person who's going to review your code or who's going to maintain your code while creating release notes. They don't want to have like 10 different commits. So it's a nicer way to just squash your commits, and just for one single feature, you may maintain that. It's good maintainability. That's one example that open source is maintainable. And then remember to test your code. That will be one of the best things to do. Test your code very well. Make sure that nothing breaks, nothing in your software, and their software is very important. So that's one thing. Then make sure your source code is rebased on with the target project to up to date. This step, like I said, if you haven't already started working on it, the project, when you have forked the project and there are more updates from the source project, you can always sync directly on GitHub. This was a new feature added a couple of months ago. Then you can push your code from your local to your GitHub account. So once you sync your code into your GitHub fork account, you can create a pull request. So the pull request works very similar to merge request. They are actually just the same names, pull request and merge request. So they work similarly. Your changes will be there for the project to be merged. You may want to link your PR or pull request with the issue you worked upon, so that people are aware that you have worked on this issue and this is the pull request for that particular issue that you have worked upon. Based on the code review, you can make any changes if it's required, because it's reviewed by a lot of people. So sometimes they might come up with some reviews. If you have any questions, you can clarify that as well on the chat option. There's always an ability to have comments one up to the other. So you can always do that and ask any question to the reviewers. That's always there, and you update your request. So once your PR is merged, you can just go and celebrate. That's yay, your contribution is done. It's very simple and straightforward. So one of the examples I thought I'll pick it up was my first contribution, which I made. I made my first contribution to Eclipse collection Code Kata. And the reason I did that with Code Kata was because I wanted to learn the process first and then really wanted to make a contribution. So I picked up an exercise. So Code Kata is nothing but it's a Japanese term incorporated into a coding world, and we are learning with JUnits. So there are failing JUnits that you have to fix. It's like an exercise. You learn the APIs by using the API methods and fix the JUnits and just carry on. So that was like the simplest of all. And I also wanted to learn about Eclipse collection. So I contributed to Eclipse collection Code Kata, and the process gave me an idea, okay, how I have to do those changes and how I can do that. So after I made this contribution, I made another contribution to the actual library, which was a very different one than this. So now let's discuss about tips on finding a project to contribute. So one of the most difficulty I had in last couple of years was how to find the project. Like everyone, I think, who's starting fresh needs to know where to look for, what are the resources, how do I contribute? The first thing you look for is the project. So I really recommend look for a project you are familiar with, something which you are already working on, is very easy to contribute to, and then look for a project where contributions are welcome. As I said, if you see the project is making changes, like if they are releasing or if there are pull requests coming in, that gives you an idea about the project's is active project. So you don't want to contribute to a dormant project which is not even taking any contributions. There's nothing happening. And the contributions are also welcomed. If you see a guideline, a proper way to guide people who want to contribute, like Eclipse collection, I think is one of the very good projects to start with. I found it everything I needed. All the guidelines were there, all the contribution steps were there, and I never had any problem to start with in that project. Some project also invite contributions from Twitter posts. And I saw this very recently, like I think it was with Spring project. So Spring has a lot of projects in its umbrella. At times I've seen people from Spring, they have tweeted about first time contributions are welcome. So they post the issue request and you can see that, and you can also contribute that way. So that's a very good idea. You can also search for trending projects on GitHub. That's also another way. You can also create your own projects like Code Kata projects to learn new projects. That's also another way of contribution. So you can try that out as well. Now let's look at tips on finding an issue to contribute. Once you have finalized your project, you want to finalize what issue you want to look for. So if you follow your projects in which you are interested, you watch them on GitHub and Twitter and other social media platforms, you can actually look the direction, and if you see any issues over there, you can you feel comfortable with, you can actually go and contribute. So you can look for issue labels like good first time issue or first timers issue. That's always an indication that this is something you can get started with very easily. So low hanging fruits like that. So that's easy. You can also get in touch with project owners and get some help on where to get started. So if you're able to, you can get in touch with the project owners for via Twitter or any other platform. I also actually started contributing to Microprofile by joining their community calls. So I was following the project and I joined their community calls, and they welcomed me very well. And whenever you are in the community calls, sometimes they have asked, okay, we need help with this project, is somebody there to help us out? So this is always a good way to start. You don't just have to contribute in code, in terms of code, there are other ways too. So these are some of the links, and I'll post these links as well so that you all know. Good first issue.dev is actually, I've tried this, it's very good. Some of them, I think they send emails to you as well whenever they find out a first timer label on a specific project that you have subscribed to. You can actually get an email saying, okay, this is the project, that is having a label. This issue is labeled as first timers. Do you want to contribute? Something like that. So you get an email, and if you want, that's also a good starting point. So areas to contribute. So I have been talking about certain areas, like not just in terms of writing a code or a program. Let's look at more areas as well. So I thought this picture was very nice because Don Rab, who's the owner, who's the writer of Eclipse collection, he tweeted the other day about Eclipse Foundation, and they needed help wanted, and the community can contribute. So tweets like these, blogs like these, they kind of motivate you that contributions are welcome. They want you to contribute, so you can go and get started, and you'll always find somebody who's helping you out. So I thought this was very nice. So now let's look at that. So you can write code. That's always an option of contributing. You can refactor code. You can help with the documentation. There's always an scope of improvement for documentation, because the project is evolving. So open source projects keeps changing, the direction is changing, or sometimes, you may find, okay, I saw this documentation and I applied to it, but few things were, missing. Someone who has written this may have made some assumptions, so you can clarify and help with the documentation as well. You can also help with the environment setup. Like if you see, for example, if you see a JUnit 4 library being used, if you can go and help contribute to upgrade the library. So that's also a type of contribution that you can do. You can also find out bugs. So not just to fix bugs, just you can also find out bugs. If you try to use the library more and more, you can use the library and find out any issues that you have. You can raise the issue with on the issue tab. That's always an option, and that's another way to contribute as well. You can also provide feedback. So while using the software, you can also provide what are the good feedbacks or bad feedbacks. I specifically wrote good as well, because it's always a good idea to say what things are working for you. So that way, when the project owners and committers, they are looking at the direction of the project, they know that users have given some good feedback on this feature, that you may want to keep that up to date. So it's always a good idea to have that. And also, like, you want to the other way to promote projects you admire through various talks, discussions. So this is also another way you can actually contribute and, help the community uh, just follow some of the good projects that are there. So that's another way to contribute. There's also another thing which I've seen in documentations, that there are translations required. So, like I know for Eclipse collection, there's a translation in Hindi also. There are other translations as well possible. So you can help the community who are not well versed with English. They should be able to understand the documentation in their own native language. So that's another way to provide contribution. You can also write a blog about your contribution. So whenever you write your code, it's very important that you write a blog about it, because it's gonna display what things you have added to the library. And if somebody who's looking at the feature that you have implemented and they want to see the usages, they can go and see your blog. And it's a reward for you as well, that they are looking at your blog and they will give you a thumbs up for that matters. Okay, so I think I want to take one more myth or truth here, so that I know nobody is sleeping. There's less support for open source software. Let's see how people respond to this one. It's funny, I just see the chat like number increasing. I can't really click on it, but I know Renat is there.
Yeah, I'm here. We got 4 myths, and then we have a truth and a myth from Suresh.
I'm really happy to see the mixed responses, guys. That's really good. I wasn't expecting that, but this is really good. So it's true that there's more support for open source software. That's what I would say. This is a myth. So we'll see why. If you look at Linux as an example, some of the biggest companies in the world, like Google, Facebook, rely on Linux to run their servers. So you can't just say that there is no support, because big companies, these companies are heavily dependent on these open source softwares. So they have to be really concerned if there's anything wrong with these softwares, if the security is not up to date. Of course, if Google goes down, we are not going to survive for a day at least. So so they will be always concerned about maintaining these softwares. Their business runs on it, so they have to maintain it. That's why they have a big group of people who are actively looking at the open source software. There's a separate group for them. And what's more, with open source, the business can always bring in an independent third-party support for consultation and support, rather than having to wait for the proprietary vendors to get around and addressing an issue. So you always have, you can bring in more people and you can have support and consultation for your software. But when it comes to a closed source software like proprietary vendors, you have to just push them. Okay, you have a particular issue, they have to address it, and you don't know when they are going to address it. So that's one of the reasons why open source is always it gets fixed faster than closed source software, I would say. Okay, so now is the time I will talk about my first pull request. So my first pull request, I started working on Eclipse collection. Eclipse, and I initially decided to work on 2 features, 3 new features to begin with. These were the map APIs. And I picked up the issue because I understood the issue. I picked up the library first, and then I picked up the issue. I thought this is a new API getting created. It was a simple code change, but it turned out, because I was first time working on it, so it had a lot of changes to the other interfaces. So I had to make a lot of changes, but it was all I never had to worry about those things because I always had some support. I did pair programming as well. So I did pair programming with Don Rapp. So I got a very good API structure, and his blogs are very helpful. So I knew I was doing the right thing. When I submitted the pull request, I also got an option to actually divide my features into 3 commits. Like I said that before, try to squash the commits in one commit per feature. So since I was adding 3 features, I added 3 commits. And I was able to also discover a code which could be refactored. So I contributed there as well. Technically, it made 4 commits at the end. So that's how it all started, with one few things, and then it started going on with a few more commits as well. So my outcome from my first contributions were I did pair programming with Don Rap. So that was one of the best things. I did code reviews with Nikhil Nanivedikar, which is, again, I learned a lot on how to structure your code, how to maintain the history of the project. There's always an importance given on unit testing. So that's one of the things that I really thought made a huge difference. And I implemented that in my personal projects as well. I learned to use the advanced features of Git. So since I had to do a lot of manipulations in Git, features that I never used before, like rebasing a lot of times than I normally used to, I did that a lot. Squashing commits and creating separate branches and creating integration branches, a lot of things I did learn while making my contributions. I also wrote a blog about it. So the link I've given, the Medium link that I have given in the previous section, I have written a blog over there. So you can check out the map API. I think it's yet to be released. I think Sirisha can confirm me about the dates, but yeah, it's all in there. So whenever it is going to release, that's it. So I had a couple of useful talks, which I thought are very relevant to contributing to open source. And this is a talk by Marit Van Dijk. I hope I'm saying her name right. I'm sorry if I'm not, but I saw her talk on her contributions to open source, and this was very. She talks about her own experience, the projects she contributed to, and the kind of help she got when contributing to the open source software. So that was very inspiring, I thought. So there's a link here as well. And again, Don Rab, I heard this talk at the Finance Open Source Strategy Forum. It was on YouTube. I think the link is here. And he talked about while making open source contribution adds a lot of value to your career, how you develop those people skills, how you create the aura of community around you. And I've really experienced what he mentioned. So I really wanted to add that here as well. That was very helpful. And I think that everyone should watch it. Final thoughts will be respectful in your communication when you are talking to your project reviewers, when your pull request is getting reviewed. Be nice to everyone. If you're stuck while working on any issue and unable to continue for some reason, just inform the owners and just speak up. You don't have to stall the project and just stop the work and just don't do anything about it. Be respectful for other people's time and effort as well. So you just have to communicate and be mindful of the fact that most of the people are doing just volunteer work. So all the open source software contributions are not included as part of your salary. It's free of cost, but they all do it because they have the passion to do it. So be respectful for the fact that they are doing it and they are doing a good job. Be kind to yourself and spread the infectious enthusiasm. That's what I'll end my talk with. There are a few references that I have. I thought this one should also I should include those for this, and I'm done. Thank you everyone.